Yo, have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome, everyone, to the L7C Podcast Basketball Edition. We are back. We have our basketball aficionado, Evan Debo, with us today. Evan, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. It's going to be a busy week for all things NBA with the some of the restrictions on when you can sign players, when you can make trades lifting this week. You can officially start making noon or so. But I want to start out this pod with, obviously, there's been a lot of off-season moves that have happened since, but no greater off-season move than my NBA pod host getting married in the middle of a pandemic last weekend. So congratulations officially from Podcast Land. It was good to socially distant see you in person to tell you that and everything else, but for the listeners, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad it was actually able to happen. Obviously, we were supposed to get married in June, and then we had to push it back, and then God threw us a bone because after our wedding the next week, DeWine basically said no dancing at weddings, and that would have taken a lot of fun out of our wedding, so got lucky there.
That would have taken a lot of fun down because we all got down at Martin's wedding. And with masks on, they were very stringent upon. We all had masks on. We're sweating pounds off of our faces, but no, yeah, that would have been very, very disappointing if we were a week later. So no, we were able to have a little NBA like bubble for the Martin and Courtney wedding, and everything went off great, man. So
thank you.
Now back to NBA time. In the Martin and Courtney household, how did the NBA viewing rights go when games are on or when the draft's on this week? Do you guys have to fight over the TV? Is it run up against something she wants to watch? These are all things you have to consider.
Yeah, typically with the NBA stuff, we have two TVs, obviously one in the living room and one upstairs in our room, and it depends on when I get home, because if she's in the middle of watching something, then I'll just watch it upstairs and that's fine. But if I'm the one coming home with dinner or plan to make dinner, or she plans to make dinner, that we typically switch it to the sporting event that's on in the living room, since we're both there. With the NFL draft, because I wanted to watch most of it, we watched it in the living room, and then when it got late, we just watched it upstairs as well so that she could fall asleep and all that. But she's into sports. It's always easier when your significant other is into sports.
Yes, it is.
I would also.
Yeah. Well, where do you want to?
I would also say with us, we haven't talked hoops on the podcast since October 7th. I had to check the date the last NBA hoops podcast was.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
That was game 3, I believe, of the Heat Lakers were still going on. It was about the halfway point. So it's been a while, man.
It's been a long time. As predicted, the Lakers, just proved to be too much to handle for Miami, despite, how valiantly they fought in that series, the big time performances, the big time Jimmy Butler performances, just couldn't overcome the LeBron AD freight train. So the Lakers add to that running list of NBA titles. They are the defending champs, and that's obviously going to be with a lot of question marks still thrown out there in terms of the pandemic, and then a season that's going to start around Christmas time of 70, and they're going to get their 72 games in theory, unless we have to have another shutdown. And then some two juggernaut teams coming at them hard. I mean, they're going to have their work cut out for them, and Brooklyn and Golden State coming back healthy, presumably. So,
yeah, ditto to everything you just said. Shout out to the Lakers for winning that championship. Shout out to the Heat for putting up a fight. I know you and I had to re-listen to our episode on October 7th. We both said 5 the series would end, and 6 would be the absolute ending point. We both didn't think it'd go past 6, which it went 6, so good on us. So just a shout out to both teams putting on a good finals as well as you can in the NBA bubble and coronavirus world. But you brought up something about this year being 72 games, which people who do not know, the NBA did approve that the start date will be December 22nd. I know when you and I talked about it, we felt like that's a bit too early because those two teams that just finished the championship barely get 2 months off. What did you think about that start date and them playing potentially 72 games?
I think it's a good trial run for what they've been wanting to do for years. 82 is a lengthy schedule when you include the playoffs and and all the rounds. And if you want to build out the playoffs and have some of those play-in games like we had in the bubble this year that turned out really well, then you're going to have to cut back from the 82 down to the 72 or so that teams have been clamoring for years. But yeah, I mean, it's tough for your teams that just finished off, but I mean, also you got to consider the opposite end of the spectrum too. I mean, look at the my Cavs, for example, haven't played since March 11th or so. I mean, that's like 300-ish, almost 300 days that teams in what they called the delete 8. So the 8 teams that weren't invited to the bubble or considered to be in the bubble haven't played. So I mean, those guys have not played competitively. They were going to get a delete 8, like how the Bulls and the Warriors and Cavs and maybe the little bubbles of themselves sometime in September, August, but that never came to fruition. So these guys are chomping at the bit. I think in December early December we're going to see some preseason tune-up games. So might be a lot of ugly basketball for some of those teams coming back, but I mean it needed to happen. So I mean I don't expect some of the juggernauts to be playing LeBron past 28 minutes. On the Lakers side of things, I don't expect the Celtics to be out there running Jaylen Brown and some of those guys more than 30 minutes a game. We're going to see I think we're going to see a lot of the young guys get a lot of minutes, for some almost meaningless basketball to start the year. And then as things get closer, they'll try to treat it almost as if, kind of the Cavs had done towards the end of the LeBron's tenure with them, of just load management, basically. Some games you're going to put yourself potentially at disadvantage to rest players because at the end when to flip the switches, they'd always joke about and say with Ty Lue's crew and when to keep rolling. Speaking of Ty Lue, we've got a new coach in Los Angeles. It is one Ty Lue.
Yes, he is. He is hired.
Martin, what do you think about Ty getting the nod again? So out goes Doc Rivers, who was unemployed for I don't know. Seemed like it was only 24 hours or so, and he is now your new coach in Philadelphia. We'll get to the Philly situation in a second, but Ty Lue is out as the head man with the Clippers, tasked with trying to get that team that's minds just seemingly weren't in it when they got bounced early in the second round, with all the high aspirations with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and obviously got a lot of talent that he brings back. What do you think about the move? What do you think about what maybe Ty brings to the table that Doc didn't? Yeah, just go from there.
Well, I think we both said that someone's going to have to go after that 3-1 collapse, and it's typically the coach, not the star player. So Doc I felt he was a scapegoat in that, but he needed to go just because they needed to get rid of him.
I agree.
But with Ty, I mean, Ty, he's the player's coach. There's always the reports that they get along with him. There's always reports saying that the players go to him first before they go to the head coach or GM and things of that nature. And I feel like he wouldn't be the coach if Kawhi and Paul George didn't want him to be the coach. So I feel like they have their guy. Now, is he going to be the guy to shift their mental fortitude and things like that? I don't know. Obviously, we had Ty Lue in Cleveland, and he was the head coach when we won the championship after he took over for David Blatt. So he has championship pedigree. He's been in this league in a long time. So I do feel like he can do a good job with the personalities on the team. They just have to buy in.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, Ty's a player's coach. I mean, Doc is a player's coach too. So I mean, I think the move was just almost, hey, we need to change the scenery here. If you're Ballmer and the Clippers, just looking at how everything went down, and I think that Doc was just almost a scapegoat in that instance. But yeah, I mean, Ty's not ever going to be, not that he's not doesn't have the know-how, the knowledge. Ty's not ever going to be that guy that comes up with the super crazy, unexpected, out of bounds play to win the game with 4 seconds left. But he's not a phenomenal X's and O's 40 chess kind of guy like some of your other folks are across the league. But there's also something to be said about that. He is really good at managing personalities, of holding the big guys accountable. Now, I'll be honest. I mean, it's going to be, LeBron showed us that, hey, you know what? I can be coachable. Even if he barked back at Ty when he was on the bench, game 7, or was that, I think it was game 7, it may be a little early on in that 2016 Cavs Warriors series where, I mean, Ty just chewed him out on the bench. Like, I think LeBron always talks about, I had like 40, 10, and 10. And he's like, LeBron, you need to do more. And he's like, are you bleeping kidding me? He knew he was capable of it. Now, I have a lot of questions about Kawhi in terms of taking constructive criticism. That'll be absolutely a storyline throughout the year is that relationship between those two. Obviously, Ty's got to kind of, as a coach has to do, they got to kind of bend over backwards for their star players. But I mean, at a certain point, we've looked at Kawhi a lot of times of, hey, can you take accountability when the Spurs try to hold him accountable for some things, contractually off the court and then on the court too. We started the media leaks and then we left. Same thing of sorts towards the end of the tenure in Toronto, more on the contractual side of things. But I'm not going to hold that against him. I mean, he needed to explore his options and he just wanted to go back home. So, but we have seen that with the LA Clippers so far in that first season. So they've got a lot to grow. I think Ty's the guy who can get him there and hold him accountable. But I think it's all going to come down to, how that Kawhi relationship and Ty relationship goes. So, I mean, personnel wise, they're probably going to move a few things. I don't expect them to do a whole lot other than run it back, even though people kind of rip Paul George for that. I mean, that's kind of their team. They got to figure out what they're doing about Harold paying him a whole bunch of money if he's going to just be kind of coming off the bench. And he was a dud in the bubble down there. But I mean, they definitely need some front court size if they're going to compete with the Lakers. They're going to compete with Denver when that was what really hurt them in that series was, I mean, besides Zubac, they didn't really have a whole lot. So, but those are all things yet to be determined. Again, we'll find out a lot of this week. There's been a lot of crazy things floated out there, and who the heck knows? Maybe Russell Westbrook will end up that way somehow with the Clippers. So let's transition to Houston a little bit. Houston loses. Basically comes to a mutual understanding of, hey, we're just not going to extend another contract or what have you, and part of ways with Mike D'Antoni.
Right.
Mike D'Antoni is now the front man on the top of the assistant bench for new head coach Steve Nash in Brooklyn. D'Antoni famously, who patented the seconds or less suns, with Nash as the point guard, the roles are almost reversed of sorts there with now he's kind of still mentoring him, but now the coaching reins are on Steve Nash up there in Brooklyn, trying to manage the personalities of Mr. Dinwiddie, Mr. Durant, Mr. Irving. That's going to be a scary team coming out of there. But and then also in Houston, so we have Mike D'Antoni out. They hire Steven Silas, a well-respected assistant coach and son of former Cavs coach, LeBron's very first coach, one Paul Silas, who well respected in NBA circles. What an absolute great NBA legacy family there. So young Steven's going to get the reins in Houston. Out is Daryl Morey,
Yep.
who is now in Philadelphia. Didn't take long. I think I told you originally. We're looking at what, 24. I said it's going to be a 24, 48 hour on the market hire. Somebody will pick them up, and it was definitely like a week in between or something, wasn't it? But yeah, the Sixers ended up picking him up, and we'll jump to the Sixers in a second. But so you've got general manager / president of basketball ops movement, coach movement gone, and then the leak this week that, hey, maybe things aren't so great with Westbrook and Harden. Martin, what are your thoughts on what's going on down in the hurricane pathway of Houston there?
To be honest, I was shocked when I saw that Russell Westbrook reportedly wants out of Houston because of the relationship that he has with James Harden. I thought they wanted to run it back. Obviously, Russell Westbrook's contract is ginormous, so now him saying he wanted out and someone trying to take that contract is going to be difficult. But again, I was just shocked because I guess now looking at it from a basketball perspective, Russell Westbrook can't play off the ball. He has to have the ball in his hands at all times, and the Rockets were built for James Harden to have the ball in his hands at all times, so it just didn't work, and now Russell wants out, and the teams that somehow had like the Knicks or something like that, but I was just shocked. I was like, okay, well, it looks like this experiment didn't last too long. It was 1 year, and now he wants out. And it has me looking at Russell Westbrook differently because obviously KD split from him, and then he went to Houston, and Chris Paul took the OKC team to the playoffs as well because that's who they traded for. And then just seeing him play at Houston just didn't work out. So that's just what I thought. What did you think about it?
Well, first I thought it was, I don't know if it means that somebody's blowing smoke, obviously, when Shams and Woj start dropping bombs. There's obviously truth to it. But didn't that same day or the next day, James tweeted happy birthday at Russ?
And the Rockets did.
Was that maybe it was the Rockets instead of the, I think you're right. I think it was the Rockets, not James himself. Mm-hmm. But yeah, obviously from the PR side of things, which is my day job for listeners that follow along and listen to me ramble about sports on the side, that that's definitely a PR move of trying to save face in the midst of some crazy stuff going on. But I mean, the Houston thing, they've got a lot of contracts that were kind of short term, the Daniel Houses, all those kinds of things, the Jeff Green experiments. They've got some movement that they can do stuff, but I mean, it hurts as a fan whenever your team ends up shelling out basically every asset you have, and that you're just locked in for like basically 3 or 4 years with not a lot of movement to do stuff. It's incredibly tough to see. I mean, towards the end of LeBron's tenure, it was like, how can the Cavs, with the Cavs the second time, how can the Cavs improve, with what they have? They had locked Tristan Thompson down to a crazy large deal. Iman Shumpert way overpaid as well, too. I mean, and those obviously were, hey, thanks basically for helping us win a title kind of contracts. But when you give away your first round pick every year and, years ahead, I mean, at a certain point, you're left with no assets, no draft capital. There's no way to improve your team. And that's kind of Houston right now. They have basically almost 131 million on their books right now, which I think is still a little, let me see the new projected numbers, which is still a little shy of the tax threshold of 136. So, I mean, they're definitely over the cap. But, I mean, there's not a lot of movement there. They gave up a lot of picks to do that CP3 swap and get off that deal, too. So, I mean, they can – Russell Westbrook is still obviously an asset. If this comes to we can't get past this impasse and we got to move him somewhere, he absolutely can command a decent prince's ransom, we'll call it, as opposed to a king's ransom. Places, I mean, they'll get paid to get off of him, but is that enough to do much with Harden, who still says he's committed to Houston, yada yada yada? There's just, James is who he is, but obviously he's really tough to build around. They've tried it different ways. but I think they have to. I think they have to grow in so many different areas. I just don't know that they have assets for. So one team that's come out of the woodwork to kind of say, hey, we'll kick the tires on Russ and potentially overpay or whatever is the Charlotte Hornets and one Michael Jordan. I think that'd be interesting. Somebody else put it on a podcast I heard earlier this week really well that, that's Russell Westbrook running his own team that's going to end up going like 42-42, barely scratching an 8-7 or 6 seed somewhere. It's still really freaking entertaining basketball for us to watch. You're exactly right. When he has the ball, he's commanding an offense, and it's the Russell Westbrook show. I mean, that's where we want to be at. So as a fan, honestly, I'm rooting for the split. I don't know what Houston gets back to make the numbers work. Obviously, I think Batum's got to be involved. You got to get rid of some younger guys in there, maybe Bridges, those kinds of things. In addition to picks, but which helps Houston, maybe get some draft capital and young assets that they can move on to something better that they do like. There's a lot to be seen still there in Houston, and I don't know. I don't know if this is. I'll be honest. I don't know that this is a more than a 7th seed at best as constructed, sounds like it's saying a lot, but I don't know if it is. What do you think, Martin?
In terms of if Houston does get rid of Russell Westbrook, what's their seed?
Well, in terms of if he stays there, I mean, the West is getting back some of those teams that have been out of the playoffs. I mean, Suns are looking great too. Golden State's coming back. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be determined out west.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's trending down for Houston in a big way.
I don't see them being higher than a 7th, 8th seed with everyone coming back. And then to your point of if he went to Charlotte, I also see that as a marketing thing since he is signed underneath the Jordan brand. You can't just have people be an obscurity. And if, hey, Russell gets on your team, Charlotte would get more games on national television. Obviously, they'll get a couple of Brooklyn versus Charlotte nationally televised games because you have Durant versus Westbrook.
Sure.
So you'll get those type of things. So I could see it working from a marketing and a making money standpoint for if Russell did get shipped to Charlotte. But Houston, I mean, they sold out, and Daryl Morey said they were always built. They were building to beat the Warriors. That's how their team was constructed. They didn't care about any other.
And they had them close a couple of years.
Did. I mean, I agree. They had them close. That game they missed 27 threes. That should have been the series to do it.
So if you're Houston here, it comes down to this. If we jump ahead to if you're as constructed, if we jump ahead to the 2022-2023 season, so heading into 3 full seasons from now, basically, you owe Russell Westbrook $46.6 million, James Harden $46.8 million, and Eric Gordon $19.5 million. That is $122 million of a cap that projects to be 115.7 according to Woj today.
That's wild.
That's hard to do anything with.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, you're already over there, and you can only really continue to stay over if you re-sign your own guys. I mean, you'll still get the basically the cap mid levels that you can spend, those kinds of things. But I mean, and if we just jump back to another big contract this year and next year, you've got Robert Covington there at 12.1 for this year and 12.9 million for 2021, 2022. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Robert Covington, don't get me wrong, absolutely is an asset. I've heard that floated out there is, hey, if the Celtics are looking to move on from Gordon Hayward, who's on his last year, and they want to do some upgrades in terms of length and defense and stuff too. Robert Covington obviously is a hellacious defender that you can stick on somebody's best guy every night to rest your Tatums and your Browns. But I could see something there, and Gordon Hayward would look would be an interesting wrinkle in Houston alongside Eric Gordon and James Harden and whatever else you get back with Westbrook. Then I can start to see, okay, well there's some depth here in some certain positions if you did move Russ for some teams. So yeah, I mean, a lot to be determined on Houston. I mean, every team, it seems, Martin's just got a lot of excitement between what could happen, what will happen. Obviously, things are going to change so much this week. We're going to end up probably looking up and, like, I don't know, Westbrook somehow is on the Magic or something in like 6 days. Who knows? Who knows where we're going? I mean, with things opening up, the trade moratorium being lifted tomorrow, free agency starting next Friday.
Yep.
It's going to be interesting. Let's jump to Philadelphia. So we teased a couple things. So Daryl Morey in to run the basketball operations in Philadelphia. Now he will be the president of basketball ops, so not the GM. That's still Elton Brand.
Yep.
And then Doc Rivers is back reuniting with Morey. Both. Well, no, not reuniting with Morey. I'm getting confused here. But so you're pulling those two together in Philadelphia from the Clippers and from Houston, two very successful teams to try to revive the Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid wagon here. So there's a lot that needs to be fleshed out. I mean, the biggest thing I think too is they needed a better coach, one who's not going to stick Embiid 70 feet from the basket. As obviously that's a gross example there, and not really 70 feet. And then two, they really need some dynamic shooting. I mean, it was really obvious last year. I mean, one, first and foremost, they could have a do-over. I'm sure they're backing up the Brinks truck to Jimmy Butler if Jimmy even wanted to stay there, and giving him everything that they can. And then also too, I mean, I would argue just as big a loss as losing JJ Redick. He just opens up so many options for Ben to drive, for Joel to be able to hurt other teams with double teams to send it out to a 40-some% 3-point shooter. They're going to have to address that in the offseason, but obviously in terms of the three teams we just talked about that are kind of all at crossroads, Houston, the Clippers, and the Sixers here, I really like the Sixers' direction in terms of who they have in place. Not that Ty Lue and the Clippers, which would be the next best option, don't have a lot of good assets, but in terms of, hey, here's some really good basketball minds to fill the holes that are in place and fix some existing problems. I really like having Morey and Doc Rivers in my corner. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think with Morey, Rivers, Elton Brand, I do feel like that's a good coaching front office thing. It's a lot better when you say it out loud than when I just looked at it on paper. And I think, I mean, with Daryl Morey, I mean, even though they never won a championship in Houston, they were very close to getting to the finals. They had a successful run where they've been the 1 or 2 seed, close to it multiple times. James Harden has always been in the top 3 or so at MVP during Daryl Morey's run of the team. And then Doc, I mean, as much as we give Doc grief, I know that stat that he blew 3-1 leads in like each presidency or something like that in the past couple presidencies. He's still a very good coach. So it's definitely what the Sixers needed in getting those two guys there. And then now with them there, I guess they need to sit down with Ben and Joel and be like, do we need to make this work, or do you ship one of them? Because that's always been the question. And me personally, you don't get rid of your best talent unless you can get a billion pieces in return that could somewhat compensate for the talent. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they've got, so we talked about teams that are kind of handicapped where they're at and addressing some of those issues. Yes. I mean, first and foremost, figure out what the heck is going on. They don't hate each other. No. That's a good thing. That's better than Westbrook and Harden, but figure out how to make the most of Embiid and Simmons. They are way too talented for this not to be figured out somehow. And again, I really like the people in management's corner and trying to move the chess pieces to get this to work well, because we've seen it work well. If you go back to, now granted, you've got Jimmy Butler in there, you've got JJ Redick in there, if we rewind the clock a couple years, that obviously helped that situation a lot. but we didn't have the issues we had. We didn't have him be 70 million feet from the basket. We didn't have, Ben Simmons basically just be turned into a half court passer when they had to run a half court offense. I mean, there's ways to move him off ball and get a little bit more creative with that you just didn't have under the previous regime. So, but Philadelphia, in terms of payroll, they're the second highest team in the league behind the Golden State Warriors. Now I think they have a little bit more that they can maneuver here. They're obviously the Horford contract's really tough. That's their second, not their second highest one, but Al Horford's owed 27 and a half this year, 27 million next year, and 26 and a half the year after. Now, I'll be honest, I think we haven't seen the best of Al Horford yet. I mean, that obviously was not a good fit to sign him, but I mean, Al certainly is really capable here. But I think it's got to be a roll off the bench, and then you say, can we realistically do $27 million for a guy coming off the bench to kind of command the second unit? I mean, Al brings a lot of veteran leadership. He's a great defender, everything else, but that's almost an albatross of a contract. But Tobias Harris is max too. Owed 33 this year, jumps to 36 million in 2021, 2022, 38 million in 23, and then concludes at 40.9, Martin.
Jeez.
Tobias Harris, 40.9 in the 2023-2024 season. You want to talk about a contract that's hard to move. Not that Tobias Harris isn't a good scorer, but for a guy who's roughly going to be 18 to 20 points per game, a lot of ISO scoring, not a lot of court vision and setting other teammates and stuff up. Not that he's not a good teammate. That's really tough. I think it's possible to move on from him and get some other folks. I mean, there's tons of different players across the league you can look at. You can look at, could something be done with a Harris and Westbrook deal? Although Houston is never going to deal with Daryl Morey to help him out or bail him out of previous bad deals whatsoever. But could you do something with Gordon Hayward and Tobias Harris? I mean, there's tons of those guys across the league that might just need a change of scenery to see what else happens in terms of shaking stuff up. But no, I do think they've got a lot of potential there for making some moves and adjusting some stuff in free agency. If they were to do some sign and trades, that's about the only way they can do it with such a high payroll that they have. But no, I mean, I expect Philadelphia to come back and be a strong Eastern Finals contender once again next year.
I do want to say with the Sixers, I always felt like if Embiid and Simmons did have the right direction, that team could always be in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I'm now excited to actually watch the Sixers play underneath a good coach and good basketball president of operations, things like that. So I'm excited. But I think the biggest, most shocking coaching hire was Philadelphia up the street, and Brooklyn, which none of us saw coming, was Steve Nash, the two-time MVP, the Basketball Hall of Famer, is now the head coach for the Brooklyn Nets. Evan, when you first saw that news, did you think it was a joke, or were you like, what the heck?
Oh, no, I thought it was a joke. I'll be honest. I thought it was a joke. But once you kind of sit down and put your head around it, you come to terms with two things here that I think are very important. That said, you know what, this isn't a joke. We talked a little bit earlier about with the Steven Silas hire. At some point, you need to bring in some new blood into NBA coaching circles. You can't just keep recycling your Nate McMillans and Alvin Gentrys and some of those guys and say, you know what, like, it's going to work. It's going to take us over to the promised land with the 7th coaching spot that some of these guys have been at. So that's the first thing that I said, you know what, okay, I can see that. And obviously, when we're talking about dynamic offenses and minds and brilliant basketball minds, Tim Duncan is now joining the ranks with the Spurs as a high assistant coach. I mean, he stepped in for Pop on a couple times and been the acting head coach too. I mean, when you have such skilled players like that have been in the trenches and have seen everything. I mean, Jason Kidd had made that transition too for a little bit. It's worth a shot to do that. So, Steve obviously is a brilliant mind that brings a lot to the game. Now, granted, just as we said with Ty Lue, I mean, how Ty Lue is not the same mind that Steve Nash is by any stretch of the imagination. I think Steve Nash can call an offense way better than Ty Lue. I think he can come up with out of bounds plays and contingencies and do the 4D chess thing way better than Ty Lue. But Ty Lue gets his players and can manage personalities. Can Steve Nash do that? I don't know. So I think it's worth a gamble. If you're the Nets, obviously a lot's on the line with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, trying to figure out the Spencer Dinwiddie player rep contract thing, and then trying to figure out if you're going to somehow weave in Karis LeVert, or you're going to move him for something. I mean, Karis LeVert can command a lot on the market if you were to try to send him somewhere else right now. But the second piece that got my mind off of the, oh man, that was a joke thing is, at the end of the day, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant have to be okay with who their coach is. There's no way they made this hire without saying, Kevin, what do you think? Kyrie, what do you think? And, dating back to the Golden State tenure with Kevin Durant, while not in official assistant coach capacity, Steve was hired and a member of the basketball operations side of things with the Warriors, working with Kevin Durant in practices, so and working with him off the court too, in terms of just some play development. I mean, I'm not saying they're sitting down looking at play saying we should run this. No, but I mean, just that was a connection that was established back in Golden State that obviously I think helped sell Kevin on it. So I mean that I think probably led them seriously looking, if you're Brooklyn, at Steve Nash as their coach. So again, I think Kevin had to sign off on that. I mean, he's up there in that 1A category, I like to call it. Your LeBrons, your Kawhis, and your Kevin Durants. Until there's someone else to jump into that threshold, or one of those steps back and is off, starts losing or diminishing their skills and what they're able to do physically as Father Time creeps in. Those are your three guys. And Kevin, as long as you have one of those three guys, they have to have say in who their coach is.
Agree. I think also too with Steve getting this job, I know there was a lot of pushback because you and I follow basketball religiously, and we had no idea that Steve Nash was even interested in coaching. So that was new. And then people saying that you did bring up the advisor type role he had in Golden State, but he was never an assistant coach and things like that, while other people felt like he passed some people up and got the job. But I mean, that's just the way life is. But then you see the success of someone like Steve Kerr, who was a player, and I feel like he has the same temperament as Steve Nash, and obviously we see how successful he was.
From the broadcast booth to an NBA title in a year. It's possible.
Yeah, but I think my biggest thing with Steve is, since from seeing him play and seeing him talk, he's so level-headed. When Kyrie has Kyrie moments, how is Steve going to deal with that? Because I think that's what's going to keep the team together or tear them apart.
Yeah, I mean, it's always Kyrie. Kyrie is one of the most gifted basketball players we've ever seen and we ever will see. When we're looking back on Kyrie's legacy 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it's going to be, how could he have made better use of his off the court stuff and everything else. Now, granted, some people just don't, and that's, I want to make sure I'm conscious of saying, we all have expectations for Kyrie. Those aren't Kyrie's expectations. Kyrie makes that known all the time. He's not, basketball isn't the biggest thing to him. At times, Kevin Durant has said basketball is not the biggest thing for him. So if you have two of those guys that kind of have some of that mentality of, hey, like they know that when they step on the court, not that they don't put time into their craft and everything else, but when they step on the court, that they're bad dudes. I mean, if you go back to the Pulp Fiction movie that I love to reference when talking about some of these guys, I mean, their wallets say bad MFer on it if they were to pull them out. But it's just, to me, it's always a matter of, man, if you applied that Kobe Bryant mentality to him, if you applied that LeBron James mentality to him, who could they be? How dominant could they be? But I feel like these are two guys that are very teetering, as you said, that, sometimes their heads in the game, sometimes they're not. Obviously way more so with Kyrie Irving, but Steve's got his work cut out for him. So I think that'll help with having Mike D'Antoni on the bench with him, who's managed the Westbrook, Harden, and CP3 things in years past, and obviously with Steve and Amari back in Phoenix, Shaq in there briefly. This is a guy with a lot of experience dealing with some high-profile players and some high-profile personalities. None bigger than the big Shaqtus in Phoenix, probably, in terms of just sheer basketball glow on and off the court, and how he's got his own gravitational pull to him with everything he's involved with. So that really helps having him on the end of the bench there. But, we'll see. I mean, Brooklyn's another one of those fantastic storylines. I'm just so excited to get basketball back to see Kevin Durant play for the first time in a while. So, yeah, it'll be interesting.
I do want to say just a quick funny thing with Steve Nash, because obviously he's the head coach, and then you have D'Antoni, and then obviously now Amari Stoudemire is on his staff too. We need to find a way to get Quentin Richardson, Sean Marion, and Joe Johnson, and we have that so fun Phoenix Suns starting five just as coaches now. That'd be funny and great. For the young people who did not see that team play, they were fantastic. Just couldn't get to the finals.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much. I just can't get back to the overarching theme of this pod of there's so many different contingencies. There's so many different things that are going to happen this week. I mean, this is finally what we've been waiting for. I mean, I know you do too. Looking at the end of June, going into July, we're always waiting to see when that clock hits midnight and free agency opens up, and we just had the draft and everything else. Now we're going to get it all within 5 days. Like this is NBA offseason Christmas this week. So there's so many things that are going to pop up, so much movement, some stuff that's going to come out of the woodworks, like Russell Westbrook discussion like last week that's going to pop up that we're not sure about. One last note on the Nets. Sure. Before we talk about a couple other coaching hires here in other markets. Martin, man, they've got a lot of assets. I mean, a lot of assets to play with that I think you can. Karis LeVert is a budding all-star that, I mean, any team would love to have. I mean, there's so many, just with him alone. I mean, obviously you need some stuff to I'm not looking at contracts. I'm just talking about budding potential for solidified. We know who this guy is and what they could bring to a team. I mean, we talked about some guys like the Haywards and Westbrooks and Harrises that are moving around. You got Blake Griffin in Detroit. You've got Aaron Gordon in Orlando. I mean, at a certain point, some of these teams got to be looking around each other, and not that it's the island of mismatched toys, but in some instances, it could be that moving some of these guys here or there may be the difference. And I'm not saying Karis LeVert for Blake Griffin is a good trade. Obviously, with all Blake's injuries and everything else, they would need to include other things in that, likely from Detroit side of things. But I mean, that would rally a fan base and give the Pistons somebody to really kind of build a team out around. That could be, really top tier talent in a couple years. But also looking down the list for the Nets, it's clear that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, for whatever reason, even though all the numbers, the eye test, everything else tells you the complete polar opposite. You just got to shut up and accept it. It was what we knew from day one with the signing. They value DeAndre Jordan.
Yep.
They value DeAndre Jordan over Jared Allen for who knows what reason. Jared Allen is how many years younger? Let's see here. Where'd you go, DeAndre? 10 years younger. Same position, same height, higher motor, moves better defensively better. I think DeAndre's time is kind of come and gone. But again, there's some things you're gonna have to give and take with what Kyrie and Kevin are gonna want to have them on your team, and I think obviously that's going to have to be one. So with that being said, you've got Jared Allen to play with. I think Joe Harris is a free agent. They'll have to see if they're going to worth bringing him back, or they'd rather have cap flexibility to absorb a higher end contract if they were to send out Karis LeVert and Jared Allen to some deals and things like that. So I mean, there's so many different pieces they can move around here. And then they drafted Nick Claxton last year. Can't remember what SEC school was he a LSU kid? Does that sound right? No, Georgia. Out of Georgia. I mean, too. So I mean, he didn't play a lot last year. Obviously, he's only 20, 21, something like that. But I mean, they've got some guys. They certainly got some guys that they can move around and play with. Tyler Johnson obviously is a guy that they could use to make the numbers work because his contract's up a little higher and they really don't have any plans for him. But no, I mean, I'm really excited to see what Brooklyn does. I mean, I think they could easily vault back in. They could vault up to there's a lot of buzz about them now, but they could vault up to the Laker conversation and the Heat conversation and the Celtics conversation instantaneously, depending on how this week goes for them. Watch Brooklyn. If there's anything you've been listening to so far in this 50 minutes that you've listened with us, watch Brooklyn in the next week. Let's see what happens. Martin, let's shift gears to some of the other coaching hires. Let's drop all the way down to the state of Louisiana, where we have a Stan Van Gundy signing.
Gundy.
What'd you think about when you saw SVG back in the coaching ranks? What do you think he's gonna bring to the table with Zion? And were you surprised it wasn't the other Van Gundy?
I was surprised it wasn't the other Van Gundy, because that's the Van Gundy that everyone was talking about trying to get back into coaching. But I feel like he's comfortable doing the big ABC games with Mike Green and Mark Jackson. So with Stan coming in, I mean, Stan's a very good coach. Obviously, I remember him mostly for when he was the coach for the Shaq Wade Miami Heat days before Pat Riley took over and they got the championship. And obviously, he was a coach in Detroit too. The guy can coach. I feel like that's a good coach for those young, energetic players, Lonzo, and obviously Zion Williams. So I feel like it was a good hire.
So before TV, obviously a lot of people remember Stan from the Heat and the Magic days. So he was with Miami from 2003 to 2006, and then he was with the Orlando Magic from 2007 2012, ushering on a young Dwight Howard team that went to the 2009, culminating in the 2009 NBA Finals, where they lost in 5 games, wasn't it, to the Lakers as a part of the Lakers
those
Lakers title there. And then obviously in between those Detroit years from 2014 to 2018, he was head coach in basketball ops. Never, if there's one thing we've learned from this decade, you can't, while it's a really good bargaining incentive to get the guy you want, giving the same guy the powers to be basketball ops or GM guy and coach doesn't work out. How many examples have we had in this decade of that? It's probably a really good negotiating tactic of, hey, here's not only the keys to what's in the garage, but here's the keys of the house too, with everything in the garage. There's just too much to manage. There's too many personalities, and tough decisions have to come. You're emotionally too invested probably in moving on from the players or subtracting to the roster because you play with them every day. Yep. If you're a guy that sits up in a basketball ops thing solely and just gets to look down and watch practice every day, you're a little less emotionally invested. You can look at things a little bit more objectively. So that's one of those things that I think really hurt the Detroit years for Stan Van Gundy. So he's got a lot of opportunity here to help shape the direction with Zion. They'll have I don't have the roster up in front of me. JJ Redick should be on there, I think, for another year. But just so many so many possibilities there with some great young talent in there down there. What do you think? I mean, we know that Stan Van Gundy teams are defensive minded teams, so I think that's going to help because man, they were bad defensively last year. But Martin,
Yeah.
is there anything that stands out for you in particular with what you'd like to see in New Orleans with Zion's growth, with some of the other growth? There's Drew Holiday's another name that's been floated out there as they might be moving on from them. GM or Executive Vice President Basketball Ops David Griffin has reportedly been maybe shopping him a little bit to see what else can we do to the roster to help equip Zion. What do you see this next week going, or what would you like to see this next week and beyond go for Stan Van Gundy and the Pelicans?
I would say we'd be remiss to not also mention the most improved player of the year on the team, Brandon Ingram.
Absolutely.
Since, everyone knows that Zion is the headliner, but Brandon made significant strides, and he's really becoming a fine young player. So if he continues to get better, and then obviously if Zion continues to get better, obviously the biggest thing is going to be outside shooting. Anyone who watched the Cavaliers from 2003 to the first stint with LeBron, that was always the thing that we always wanted him to improve to, is outside shooting, and he put in the work to do that so that people just can't sag off him so he can hit that mid-range J and that three. So those are small things that I want Zion to improve on: his defense, conditioning. And then obviously with Lonzo too, he needs to improve his shooting as well, his free throw shooting. Those are just small things that, they don't sound small, but they're small things that these players need to improve on. I don't think they'll be in the playoffs, but I at least think they should be a contending 40, because this is the West, a 45 to 47 win team, and I feel like that'd be in the right direction.
Yeah, again, defensively, that's where they need to make some upgrades, and they've got a lot of youth there. They were one of the highest scoring teams in the regular season. Obviously, it's going to have the asterisk with COVID of starting and stopping and everything else, but they were fifth in points per game. So they definitely got the floor a lot. They are a team that's, just has a lot of promise. You're right. Brandon Ingram I can't believe I hadn't mentioned him at that point, is somebody that's, made big steps last year, most improved player. That's another guy that I'm like, man, if you had that, getting greedy, if you had that Jimmy Butler thing mentality to apply to all the physical tools in the world, man, can you imagine his ceiling? Can you imagine his leadership? So, in all honesty, when I'm looking at this roster, I have a lot of questions about buying solely into the Zion buzz. Like, there's part of me that looks at this team and says, I almost think Ingram should be your focal point, as bad as that is. Obviously the promise, all the physical tools, the dynamic plays, the blocking 3-point shots, everything that Zion brings to the table is great. But like, anytime we have conversations like we've had for the last 12 months of cutting into this, is Zion overweight? Does Zion need to relearn how to walk and run again? That was a actual thing. Whenever I'm hearing those things, I wonder if this is a guy who's just going to have a really great 8-9 year career of partial season.
Mm-hmm.
Substantial. Ingram's a guy I don't have those question marks about. Brandon Ingram's a guy that, whatever he is, 6'10", 6'11", with a 7-foot plus wingspan, can shoot over top of whoever he wants to. He can get to the basket whenever he wants to. His developing passing game helps him see the floor really well with some of the things he's able to do, and the opportunities able to create with his teammates off of his scoring. I almost look at it going into this season too, as I wonder if those things are going to be amplified with all things COVID, with a guy like Zion who's had some of those issues to come back from starting and stopping, and not playing basketball for so long, and some of those things when you're out of some of those core team functions with all the COVID restrictions and your facilities and everything else. That's a guy that really needs a regimen as he starts his NBA career, as opposed to just expecting them to figure them out for himself. So, but again, this is a really youthful roster. It's something I think there can be a lot of opportunity with. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be an exciting year for the Pelicans to see how they can proceed forward. This looks to me almost like the kind of the situation we saw with obviously different players, but it's almost kind of like a young Philadelphia team from 3 years ago. We've got two really polarizing stars playing different positions. If you're looking almost at Zion, kind of as a unique monster five. Yeah, five that can bring a lot of different things to the table. The box office appeal. It's just a matter of how they spend the next 2 or 3 years building around them. Are they going to take the Philadelphia route of sorts? I mean, Philadelphia is obviously not hurting, but this is the time where you got to be diligent about not overpaying JJ Redick. However many more years you're going to overpay him. Obviously, he's a really, really great sharpshooter that opens up your offense, pulls people out, spaces everybody out. But they have to make some defensive moves, as we said, and they got to make sure that they continue to have some flexibility moving forward to see, when these draft picks are able to either pan out or not pan out. So they got a lot of youth, but I really love the upside here. Our next coaching hire moves us to the great basketball state of Indiana, where out is one Nate McMillan. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And then another new name into the basketball community is one Nate Bjorkgren, Bjorkgren. In case I'm pronouncing that wrong, the listeners can come up with their own interpretation for it. So, formerly, he served as an assistant coach with the Raptors each of the past 2 seasons. So, obviously, some great Nick Nurse leadership there. Obviously, won a title during that 18-19 season, and then served as player development coordinator and assistant coach of the Phoenix Suns for 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, and an advanced scout in the 17-18 season. So, almost a quick jump here for Bjorkgren, who also has a 4 seasons of experience working in the G League. Jumping up the ranks here. But again, I'm all for let's bring in some new blood. Let's give some new opportunities, some guys, instead of just recycling the same coaches that have been serviceable and won games in the past, but they haven't gotten teams to where they need to go. So there was some talk about Victor Oladipo not being satisfied, and in the last couple of weeks, he's come out and apparently told management since then that he's all in on being a Pacer. There's some conversations on, and I think valid, what do you do with Miles Turner? What do you do with Sabonis? Because, I mean, they kind of play the same position. They both struggle playing together. So that's a team, too, that can look at some movement. Obviously, we had the great bubble experience that was, help me with the name, Martin, that they got basically for a copy machine from Phoenix.
Was it Warren?
Yeah, TJ Warren. Yeah.
Was it Warren?
Man, see, I've got basketball hiatus brain here where I'm losing people's names. But yeah, TJ Warren, that's a new GM for the Suns, champ, our very own champ from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Mr. Jones had shipped to Indiana during the year, basically for just cash almost. I mean, had that fantastic run, several 40, 50-point games. I mean, he's going to be a key player in their offense. But no, I like the hire again to bring some new blood in there to work around Oladipo and Warren. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, with this hire, I agree with new blood, because I mean, we obviously see the same coaches just get recycled. That's just how it works in sports. So seeing some new blood get a chance, obviously it worked out for someone like Nick Nurse and things like that. So just seeing the new blood it's good. It's good. Indiana, they have players. You already named them all. We'll see what they do with some of them in this offseason that's about to begin. But they got players who can play. They're always a tough out in the East. If you remember a couple of years ago, LeBron's the last year, we went Game 7 with them in the first round. So they're always a tough team. Good hire. Can't wait to see what he does. And I will also say that it's a good time to be a basketball fan because obviously with the draft and all that, we're going to see some new young talent come into the league. There's already the storylines made. And with the season starting a month and a week from now, it's good time. And we lost basketball from March all the way until basically the summer with the bubble, and kudos to the bubble. They did fantastic, and now we're going to be right back in December, and hopefully, barring any cancellations, we'll be back onto our normal basketball pace.
I want to run through two, I believe, knock on wood, because we've had so many changes. The last two head coaching hires that I believe we've yet to talk about. One being Oklahoma City parting ways with Billy Donovan, who is now in the Chicago Bulls as their head coach. And then Oklahoma City then promoting assistant, I'm going to botch the name here, Mark Daniel. I'm probably really botching that name, but he was, so Mark was, we're just going to call him Mark for the purpose of this podcast, was promoted to head coach just this past Wednesday. So he was previously had served as an assistant coach. He had been with the G League affiliate, the OKC Blue G League coach, where he'd won 3 division titles and a .572 winning percentage. So again, another young guy. He's only 35. Who's tasked with continuing to bring into their own the new roster post Russell Westbrook, post Paul George. Obviously, will they move on from CP3? There's discussions today at the recording of this podcast on Sunday, November 15th, that apparently a deal is in place to send Dennis Schroeder to the Lakers. So it's another young team that also still has some upside, obviously, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander kind of being their top guy, Lou Dort, who really stood out defensively, and Darius Bazley, who's a young guy too, coming in. They have about a jillion draft picks. I think they have 15 first-round picks and 4 sets of pick swaps between 2020 and 2026, mostly with the Clippers and the Rockets in terms of protections. So, I mean, they obviously have the best war chest here to move some stuff around with. But back to the Bulls, another team that's got a lot of question marks, to what do you do with Zach LaVine? What do you do with in the draft with the 4th pick coming up this Wednesday night? Obviously, a lot of that depends on how far guys fall or who jumps ahead to, in trades to take the guy they want. Martin, comments on both of those hires, if any?
I do think with the Billy Donovan one, I don't think they let him go. I think he decided to part ways just for.
Yes, you're right.
I didn't think he got. Yeah. But Billy's a great coach. I mean, obviously people didn't think he was that well of a coach when he had Durant, Westbrook, and then just Westbrook. But obviously seeing what this Chris Paul team did, he has to be one of the upper echelon type coaches in the league. And with him going to Chicago, I feel like that was a good hire. We'll see what they do. I think we'll know what they do with Zach after Wednesday, after the draft. So then we'll go with that. And then with OKC, I mean, that was a team that built itself from the draft, obviously with Durant, Westbrook, Harden, and now with the boatload of assets and picks. Potentially we can see that again. Obviously not to the caliber of those 3 players, but they can build a team that is contending for maybe that 4th, 5th spot in the West and a hard out for somebody. That's the outlook I see for them right now until I see what type of players they get on the team.
One thing on the Bulls that I honestly think, Donovan's going to bring in some steady leadership in there where the Hoiberg experiment, and I can't remember the other guy's name. Who was their head coach they just had? Bald guy. Oh, this is struggling, Evan. But anyway, so he's going to bring some steady leadership to the Bulls. But honestly, I think the biggest change that helps the Bulls in terms of moving forward and getting them back to where they were outside of the Derrick Rose years, that obviously the injuries and everything else really hurt them from getting to where they could have gone. Overseeing all that time, which by and large has almost been kind of like the Midwest version of the Sacramento Kings, in my opinion, with Chicago, has been the general manager, has been overseen by the general manager who took the reins from Krause. So a lot of us got to know the former GM during the Bulls years, Jerry Krause, from the Last Dance documentary, overseeing the Bulls and the end of the 1998 regime and everything else, and what contracts weren't renewed and yada yada yada. Gar Forman has been at the helm since 2003. During that time, obviously, he had made a lot of investments into the Kirk Heinrichs of the world, the Luol Dangs of the world, drafted in Ben Gordon and drafted Tyrus Thomas, I believe, I think he was drafted by that. Yeah, drafted by Tyrus Thomas with a really high pick. I mean, there's been a lot of things that have kind of plagued some of the Bulls' prospects over the years, and a lot of that's been growing frustration inside the city of Chicago with not only Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, but with Gar Forman. So they actually parted ways back in April of this year. So obviously that's a team as a part of the Delete Eight that has not played basketball whatsoever since. So as much as that's a recent change to bring in Billy Donovan, it's also been a big change from a leadership management standpoint, where you now hopefully you've got just a new perspective that you haven't had in 17 years. 17 years is a long time to kind of have somebody in one job. So I mean, it's one of those things that just finally came to fruition, and I'm optimistic that the Bulls can make a good pick in the draft this week and go from there in terms of mapping out their future post Gar era, we'll call it. So
I agree, but we have actually crossed over the 70.
But we haven't talked about the draft, Martin.
Well, that's why we got to come back. We're going to have to
I'm just giving you a hard time. There's just been, we knew going into this was going to be a nearly impossible pod to tackle everything we wanted to say, talk about all the different vantage points and all the different trade implications and who's mad at who and who's on who's in this front office now making decisions. We knew it was going to be a near impossible thing. So, we'll come back probably with some post-draft stuff. We'll give Justin some time to splice this up for us just to get folks current and updated. Most likely, I'm guessing folks will get this podcast probably Tuesday or Wednesday morning before the draft. Draft's going to be at 7 on Wednesday night. It'll be remote format, kind of like the NFL draft was too. And a lot of movement to be seen in the lottery. Just on a quick tease, picks 1 through 5, Timberwolves 1, 2 Golden State, 3 Charlotte, 4 Chicago, and 5 the 1 Cleveland Cavaliers. And we know I got a lot to say about the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we'll see what happens with Mr. Wiseman, Mr. Ball, and Mr. Edwards out of Georgia. A lot to be seen this week. It's going to be exciting, Martin.
Oh, absolutely. And you heard the man, draft is Wednesday. Both of us will be watching. We'll be live tweeting about the NBA draft. So, and then we'll definitely be back to give our review on it. We'll probably have to have a section for Evan just so he could talk about the Cavaliers pick and if it was the right pick or not. So we'll try and go through the top 5 as quickly as possible, then really hone in on the Cavaliers pick. Evan, you got anything else you want to say to the listeners before we start?
No, free agency, not too long. Free agency, I believe, starts Friday night, so we might be breaking some stuff mid podcast if we're recording into late weekend to next weekend. Might have some more player movement just beyond the draft. But yes, we will need a section on the Cavs that waking up today to deal with a Kevin Porter Jr. arrest issue. Their budding yard wing out of U.S. of a firearm in a vehicle. So it might, but obviously a personnel issue. They'll have to figure something out with Kevin. But I'll need my own corner on that. So listeners, thanks for listening to us. Thanks for investing your time with us and letting us deliver you the NBA news and notes. So we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Ditto to that. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the L7C podcast. Thank you, Evan, for coming back, being the basketball aficionado that you are. Sorry, it was over a month in basketball episodes. You guys do like the basketball episodes, so we're back. So you're going to get this one this week, and you're going to get our draft review, and then we'll be back on our more consistent cycle. So once again, thank you everyone for listening to the L7C podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.